the ancient kingdom of Elowen, once a beacon of prosperity and peace, lay in ruins. Its towering castles reduced to crumbling stones, and its once vibrant forests overtaken by darkness. The great capital, Ilyria, had once glistened beneath the light of a sacred star known as Elaria, a celestial beacon said to have blessed the land with protection and wisdom. But now, Elaria had vanished from the sky, leaving Elowen to fall into the grip of decay and despair. No one knew why Elaria disappeared, but the kingdom began to wither the night it flickered out. Crops failed, strange creatures prowled the forests, and the sky seemed to grow darker with each passing year. In the absence of Elaria's guiding light, whispers of old, forgotten evils began to stir. People fled from Ilyria, seeking refuge in distant lands, leaving only a few brave souls behind to guard what was left. Among them was a young warrior named Kyle. Kyle had been born in the final years of Elowen's prosperity and had grown up hearing tales of Elaria's light. His father, a knight of the royal guard, had sworn to protect the kingdom with his life, and Kyle had followed in his footsteps, joining the guard at the age of 16. But in the years since Elaria's disappearance, there was little left to protect. The king had died, the queen had gone mad with grief, and the people had lost faith. Now 24, Kale stood on the crumbling battlements of Ilyria's once majestic palace, his dark eyes scanning the horizon. The wind was cold, carrying with it the distant howls of the creatures that roamed the wilds beyond the city walls. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, a finely crafted weapon passed down from his father, though it had seen little use in recent years. Beside him stood Aelith, a mage from the city's ancient order of scholars, the last remaining practitioner of the arcane arts in Ilyria. Aelith was older than Kael by several decades, his once black hair now streaked with grey, his face lined with years of study and worry. Despite the weight of the years, his eyes still sparkled with the sharp intellect of a man who had seen and learned much. "Any sign of them?" Aelith asked, his voice quiet but firm. Kael shook his head. "Nothing. It's been days since we've seen anyone. I think they've given up hope." Aelith sighed, leaning on his staff. "I fear you're right. Without Elaria, they see no future here. It's only a matter of time before we're all gone." Kael clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "We can't just give up. There has to be a way to bring the light back. We need Elaria soon." Aelith looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "There may be a way, he said slowly, "but it's dangerous, and it's not something I've spoken of before because it might be nothing more than a myth." Kael turned to him, his interest piqued. "What is it, if there's even the slightest chance we have to try?" Aelith hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's an old legend, passed down through the scholars of the Order. It speaks of a temple far to the north, hidden deep within the mountains of Idris. It is said that this temple holds a shard of Elaria's light, a fragment of the star that fell to earth in ancient times. If we can find it and restore it, it may be enough to rekindle Elaria and bring back the light." Kael stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in his mind. "A shard of Elaria? How come no one's ever mentioned this before?" The temple's existence has always been a closely guarded secret, Eilith explained. Only a few in the Order knew of it, and even fewer believed it to be more than a legend. But with everything that's happened, I think it's our last chance. Kael's heart pounded in his chest. Could it be true? Could this temple hold the key to saving Elowen? He had spent years feeling powerless, watching his home crumble, unable to stop it. Now, for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. How do we find this temple? Kael asked. Eilith smiled faintly. I have an old map in the archives. It's vague, and the journey will be treacherous, but with the right preparation, I believe we can find it. Kael's mind was made up. Then let's go. We have to try. 3 days later, Kael and Eilith set out from Ilyria, leaving behind the ruins of the once great city. Their journey took them northward, across desolate plains and into the rugged mountains of Idris. The air grew colder with each passing day, and the land grew wilder, untamed by human hands. The forest they passed through was thick with towering pines and ancient oaks, their branches intertwined like the grasping fingers of some forgotten giant. At night, they camped by small fires, with Eilith studying the map by the flickering light, and Kael standing guard, ever vigilant against the creatures that prowled the dark. Though they were few, rumors of shadowy beings, wraiths, half-seen shapes, and creatures born of the darkness, kept them on edge. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, Kael sat staring into the fire, the warmth of the flames doing little to chase away the chill in his bones. His thoughts turned to the kingdom they had left behind, to the people who were depending on them. He knew this journey could be their last, but he also knew they couldn't afford to fail. Eilith broke the silence. You're thinking about Elowen, aren't you? Kael nodded. I can't help but wonder if we're too late. Even if we find the shard, can we really restore Elaria? Can we really save the kingdom? Eilith smiled faintly. Doubt is natural, Kael. But sometimes all it takes is a single spark to reignite the flame. Kael looked at him, his expression grim. I hope you're right. Days turned into weeks, and the journey grew more perilous as they ascended the mountains. The weather became harsher, with bitter winds and snow-covered paths that made travel treacherous. But Kael and Eilith pressed on, driven by the hope that the shard of Elaria was waiting for them. At last, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the entrance to the temple. It was hidden within a deep ravine, the stone doorway carved into the side of the mountain, its surface covered in ancient symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air around them seemed to hum with power, and Kael felt a shiver run down his spine. This is it, Eilith said softly, his voice filled with awe. The temple of the shard. Kael nodded, stepping forward. Let's find what we came for. They entered the temple, the air inside cool and still. The walls were lined with faded murals, depicting the history of Elaria and its fall from the heavens. At the far end of the chamber stood a massive altar, and on it rested a small crystal, glowing faintly with a soft golden light. Kael's breath caught in his throat. Is that... Eilith nodded. The shard of Elaria. Kael approached the altar, his heart pounding. As he reached out to take the shard, a voice echoed through the chamber, low and ancient. Who dares disturb the light? Kael froze, his hand hovering above the shard. From the shadows, a figure emerged. a tall, hooded being with eyes that glowed like embers. Its presence filled the room with an oppressive energy, and Kale felt the weight of its gaze on him. "I am Kale, a knight of Elowen," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I've come to restore the light of Elaria and save my kingdom." The figure's eyes flickered. "The light does not belong to you. It belongs to the world, and it comes with a price." Kael'el's grip tightened on his sword. "What kind of price?" "A life," the figure replied. "The light of Elaria can only be restored by the sacrifice of one who is pure of heart." Kael'el's heart sank. He had known this journey would be dangerous, but he hadn't expected this. Could he sacrifice himself for the sake of his kingdom? Could he make that choice? Before he could speak, Aelith stepped forward. "I'll do it," the old mage said quietly. Kael turned to him, shock and horror flooding his mind. "No, Aelith, you can't." But Aelith shook his head, a gentle smile on his face. "I'm old, Kael. My time has come. I've lived a full life. But you have a future, and so does Elowen." Kael's throat tightened with emotion. "You don't have to do this." Aelith placed a hand on Kael.